So speaking of, Senate Democrats voted to reject Majority Leader Mitch McConnell's stimulus legislation. They disagree with Republicans on how to spend nearly $2 trillion in stimulus. Joining me now is a man who can make the bridge between stimulus and what the Fed's doing, Douglas Holtz-Eakin, American Action Forum president and former director of the Congressional Budget Office, also chief economic policy advisor to Senator John McCain's 2008 presidential campaign. Douglas, you've seen a lot when it comes to what the Fed does and what the government does. Can I get your initial reactions to this sort of unlimited buying from the Fed?
I think this is a tremendous move by the Fed. I mean, they really have made an attempt to address the two crucial problems. The core problem is out in the real economy, in the Main Street economy, where there is just a lack of revenue, lack of liquidity that's going to snowball and lead to layoffs of an enormous proportions. And setting up a Main Street lending facility, something they advertised that they're thinking about doing, would be a direct attempt to address that problem. The reflection of that problem is in the financial markets, which are trying to continuously reprice the bad news and have gotten all clogged up. And by doing their best to allow those markets to continue to function, the Fed has minimized the damage of the fallout. So I think they're doing a tremendous job, quite frankly. Congress is not doing such a good job. In that failed piece of legislation was an important effort to provide that same sort of bridge financing to both small and large companies. And that's become a sticking point on Capitol Hill. It's an economic necessity, so they need to get the politics squared away quickly and get that money out there, or we're going to have more layoffs and we'll be picking up the pieces instead of getting ahead of this.
So give me some insight into how the government operates. Let's just pretend that something is passed within the next week, okay? Just
I'm not talking about that in public.
Yeah. So if that happens, let's just assume that that is. How quickly does it get into someone's bank account? How quickly can they pay their bills? Can you walk me through the logistics and the mechanism here?
Well, I think there are three different mechanisms, and they differ. One is this notion of passing the bill, and immediately there's $425 billion available to the Treasury, which they could, quite frankly, give to the Fed as backstop against losses, and the Fed could start taking bridge financing loans for Main Street companies, and they could do that very quickly. They move fast. There's also help for people who are already out of work and unemployment insurance. Those systems are up and running. The bill would beef them up. It would extend the benefits longer, loosen eligibility requirements, get more people in. That usually takes a week of waiting to become eligible, but the federal government has offered to pay the full bill for any state that waives the 1-week waiting period. So they're trying to get the cash to them as quickly as possible. And then there's the checks that you've heard so much about $200 billion worth of tax rebates, checks to families. That'll take 6 weeks to get in order. And I think of the things that are in play on Capitol Hill, that's probably going to be the least consequential in the end.
So when you wind up having these measures coming into the market, a lot of what the Fed's doing is also just helping plumbing, as well as to backstop certain industries, sure, but just helping plumbing. How does the government know what to do when we can't model the economic impact? Because the only way it's going to work is if the stimulus is more than the economic loss.
I think this is the key to going at this problem at the source, which is in these firms who are otherwise perfectly sound but have just seen their revenue go away. Think of an airline or a restaurant or a hotel. And if you can give them bridge financing until we get past the pandemic and the consequences of the pandemic, what can they do? Well, as a price of that bridge financing, they're required to keep their employees on payroll. Now you have a mechanism which is going to continuously give people money that they otherwise would not have, and that's exactly the right thing to do, and you don't have to guess how much it is. It's what they've been living on, and it will last as long as the pandemic lasts. If you start trying to do things like checks, you have to guess, okay, how many rounds do we need? How big do they have to be? That's much harder. So I think using the mechanisms that are in place, the payroll systems of the U.S. business sector, is a much superior way to go.
What else do you think that needs to get done, and how quickly? What's sort of the outstanding thing that either Congress is not addressing, the White House is not addressing, and the Fed is not addressing?
The number one issue is really the public health mission, and the testing failures, there's the lack of protective gear for the hospital sector, and there's the lack of what appears to be a national strategy on dealing with the spread of the virus. And what really is needed is for the White House to step up and say, okay, here's the plan. And we're not going to leave this to different governors and different mayors and have different timelines and shut down, as California did, the 6th largest economy in the world with no apparent warning. They need a coherent plan on the public health front so that you can plan for the economic fallout and get those two synced up. At the moment, they're completely disjointed. That's really hurting us.
Give me your outlook in terms of once we get past this, what are the structural changes that we're going to have to start living with on an economic basis?
I think this is a lot like the post-9/11 period that I lived through at the White House, which is, you had a threat to the citizens of the United States, and you had to deal with the threat. We have to deal with the virus now, it's a threat. But you also have to somehow insulate the economy from that threat. And post-9/11, that meant we had to start inspecting every container that came into the United States. We had to, make main offices more secure. There are bollards everywhere. And we spent a lot of the investment dollars on the security mission, not on raising productivity. That's slowed down growth, slowed down productivity growth. We're going to see the same thing here. Post-pandemic, there are going to have to be measures taken to not have this happen again, and those are going to divert resources that would otherwise be put into just modernization, technology improvements, and top-line growth. So I expect this to have a sort of fairly long tail and not a big V-shaped recovery.
A really great perspective, Douglas. I really appreciate Douglas Holtz-Eakin of the American Action Forum. Thank you very much. So with me, George Rusnak, Wells Fargo, and